Hey there, and welcome back to another scary no sleep story. This one was written by Reddit user Constant Anteater, and it's titled, I Have a Power, and It's Haunting Me. Ever since I was a little boy, I've been able to make things just vanish. As in, one moment it's there, and one moment it's not. I used to only be able to make small objects vanish, and I've heard the story of the first time I made something disappear from my parents about 1,000 times. I was only 4 years old, and I'd been happily smashing my Legos together, role-playing whatever crazy scenario in my mind I came up with, when the block I was proudly holding up in front of my mother suddenly vanished from my hand. My mother tells me her eyes nearly popped out of her head in surprise, seeing the block disappear into thin air. My father wasn't there to see it and didn't believe my mother when she tried to convince him of it. When he was home after work, but after an hour or so of my mother handing me random small objects and forcing my father to watch, eventually he witnessed the trick himself. My mother likes to joke that she had to close his mouth for him because it just hung open in shock. As I grew, I became aware of the ability and learned to control it, more or less. My late childhood years became any kid's dream, mostly because I could clear my plate of vegetables without ever having to put any in my mouth, which meant I could skip straight to Friday night desserts. I honed in on my little ability through my teenage years and learned to control it a bit better. Quickly, I discovered that the better I got, the bigger the objects that I could make vanish. At 15 years old, I had been sneaking into the husk of an office building that had been foreclosed on with some friends. Since it locks its doors, didn't really stop me from getting anywhere I wanted to go. It was in that building that I learned the truth about my ability. Jackson, my best friend at the time, was the only person outside of my immediate family that knew of the power. Since my parents decided it wasn't a great idea to tell everyone about it, and I was taught the same. In the loading dock of the office building sat a rusted old delivery truck with a faint shadow of a logo I didn't recognize fading on the side. The cabin void of seating and controls with tires slashed or removed entirely. Jackson wanted to see it vanish, and I was eager to impress Alex, Jackson's older sister. She'd only come with us because she had learned where we were going and said she'd tell on us if we didn't let her come along. But my 15-year-old brain didn't care. She was the kind of girl I dreamed about, already well developed for her age, with dark red hair and fingernails painted to match. Almost always with a smoky eye black shadow and burgundy lips. She was the epitome of a goth girl wet dream for my prepubescent self. Regardless, as I said, I was aiming to impress her, but never made something as big as a truck vanish. Still, I walked around the shell pretending to study it, but really just putting on a show while I considered if I could do it or not. Was I going to chicken out in front of my best friend and my crush? I don't know. Come on, dude, you're just stalling, Jackson sneered. Obviously, he was excited to see if I could pull this off. And I figured I'd stalled long enough. All right, I hissed back at him. I could feel my face grow hot with embarrassment. I quickly walked to the back of the front of the truck and placed my palm on the cold metal, doing my usual mental visualization of the object collapsing in on itself and vanishing. There was a horrible screeching noise as the metal folded upon itself, and I immediately knew what was wrong. Nothing had ever made a noise when it vanished before, but when my eyes snapped open, the twisted ball of metal sitting in front of me looked nothing like the truck it had once been. Instead of vanishing, it had twisted and spiraled up into the air and looked like a giant corkscrew. Not too far on my right stood Jackson and Alex. Jackson had a huge awestruck grin on his face, and Alex had her hand clamped over her mouth and her head tilted back slightly to take in the sight of the corkscrew that was once a truck. A moment of silence followed, which was broken when Jackson finally spoke up. "Whoa, I've never seen that before." He let out a deep breath before his gaze lowered to me. "I didn't know I could do that." "Neither did I replied, a little shocked myself. The new metal sculpture standing about 6 meters high, nearly scraping the high ceiling in an otherwise empty room. We were all still distracted by it when a voice barking through the building snapped us back into reality. "Hey, what are you kids doing in here?" A rather annoyed middle-aged man determined to know as he stomped towards us, his uniform and belt suggesting he was a security guard of some sorts. "Run!" Alex shouted, and we all took off in a different direction, fleeing from serious trouble we would get in if we were caught. The maze of hallways immediately had us separated, but hesitant to call out and give away our positions to the guard. The guard chased us, shouting at us to stop running all over the sounds of shoes hitting the cold cement floor. I was the unlucky one to get cornered in a room that had no exit. The guard standing in the doorway, one hand pressed to the frame as he bent down and took a few good breaths. "Kid, come on. Don't make me chase you anymore," he huffed, clipping his flashlight onto his belt as he quickly closed the distance between us, gripping my wrist firmly. "Let's go call your parents." I struggled, pulled, and shouted. I was scared of what kind of trouble I would get into, so I shut my eyes and wished it would go away. The disgusting gurgling sound that followed made me open my eyes to see the guard's arm snap back towards his chest, releasing my wrist in the process. His face was a picture of pain and horror as the limbs twisted into horrible positions. He curled himself into a ball on the ground and let out a scream of pure anguish, but it was cut short as his head quickly twisted almost all the way around with a sickening series of pops. I screamed. Tears began streaming from my eyes uncontrollably. I couldn't force myself to look away from the dead body of the security guard as it spasmed around on the ground for a few seconds. Then it vanished. Jackson and Alex nearly fell through the doorway as they came running to the source of my scream. When I could finally get the words out instead of just pointing at the spot where the guard used to be, "We promised to never speak of what happened ever again." The following months were hell. I'd wake up in a cold sweat to the sound of the guard's screams being cut short when his head finally snapped. I had nightmares of all my classmates looking down at me, never saying anything, but I knew that they knew what I had done. Jackson and I grew distant, and by the time I finished school and countless hours of therapy, I was almost back to normal, albeit promising myself to never screw around with my ability again. I've lived the past 3 years as a pretty average person. I haven't done anything special or used my power to become famous or anything. I've just been trying to put it behind me and leave it there for good. I was doing well until last night when the nightmare happened again, but instead of my classmates looking down at me, it was the guard that died that night. He stood over me, his right arm bent inwards to his chest, the left arm bent backwards at the elbow. His head was hanging limply to the side, and it was clear his neck had been twisted as far as the skin would allow. "You did this," he spat, bending down to look at me face to face. the simple movements sounding like a dozen branches breaking, one at a time. "You did this," he hissed again, so close I could feel his hot breath on my skin. I jolted awake as he reached out to touch me with his broken hands. I was coated in a thin, cold film of sweat. It felt like I couldn't get enough oxygen into my lungs. I needed to get my bearings, so I fumbled around with the lamp switch and quickly flipped it on. My heart sank when I was greeted by the sight of a shattered flashlight on my bedside table. That was the tipping point. I needed to see Jackson. I needed to talk to him. After all, he was one of two people who knew what really happened. The phone rang, and I was just about to hang up when a groggy female voice answered. "Hello? Hi, is Jackson available? I'm sorry, I know it's late." "Is this some kind of joke?" No, sorry." I stumbled over my own words before she interrupted me. "Jackson isn't with us anymore." She snapped and slammed the phone down on the receiver. My heart froze in my chest at her words, and I immediately began searching. Jackson and his older sister had been attacked in their homes by an intruder who had a broken bone after bone until their bodies finally gave out, leaving their corpses twisted in horrible positions. But apparently the neighbors heard no screaming or commotion coming from either house. After I read this article, I felt sick to my stomach, and I made it to the bathroom just in time to throw up in the sink. "Get it together," I whispered to myself as I splashed cold water on my burning face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I wiped my face and sniffed a few times to clear my nose. And as I blinked, the water droplets flew out of my eyes. I very slowly walked to the back of my room, running my fingertips along the hallway to steady myself. When I entered my room again, the single green block of Lego sitting on my pillow sent another rush of nausea through my body, and I turned on my heel and ran back into the bathroom. I knew it was the first thing I'd made vanish. The block from the story my parents told me. I knew it. I could feel it in my bones. It was then I started to ask myself two questions I'd never considered. If I can make things disappear, where do they go? And what if they can be brought back?